Time zone appropriate greeting to you and welcome back to the channel. Today I welcome to the Community Spotlight interview series an Australian legend within the 30k community, a content producer whose in-depth series for 30k starting should be prescribed viewing for new interested people. Welcome Macca from the Outer Circle.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Okay, Macca. These questions form two parts as per usual. A is the standard questions which I ask everyone. Then B is aimed towards more yourself and your channel. How did you get into the hobby of tabletop wargaming?
That's a funny one. So I had a relative who flew to the UK, because I have quite a lot of family live in the UK, and they brought back some Warhammer models with them. This is pre sort of Warhammer really being established here in Australia. There might have been the first store or two in a couple of capital cities, but that was it. And they bought them back for me, and then within a year or so I actually stumbled across one of these very rare small stores, and it really caught my eye, and I went, that's these models I painted. And so I went in, got a lovely white metal model. It might even have been lead at the time actually, and I believe blue, white and red was all the paints that my guardians were willing to buy me. And I believe I painted one of the worst models you ever would have seen in your life with those paints. Unthin, slapped on, wrong size brush, you name it. Everything was wrong about it, but I think I caught the bug. And ever since then, I've been into the hobby. Since probably about 1994, I believe.
What type of hobbyist are you? Painter, collector, gamer, or a bit of a mix?
I'm definitely a mix. I am a big fan of... Well, I have some collections, like the Primarchs. I've collected all the Primarchs that have been released so far. But generally, I like to have a theme in mind, usually inspired by something I read in a story or a novel, and I go, I want to recreate that or create something along those lines. So I'll go out, buy the product, and then I possibly obsessively, compulsively work to complete the project before I'll move on to the next thing. And I'm a big believer in the fully painted is for closers mentality. A lot of people like to say, oh, I've got no time to paint. But me, I've sort of made a habit of speed painting and learning tips and tricks over the years to really encourage my high-speed painting, which gives me, not the greatest results, but definitely more than tabletop ready.
What game systems do you play? Are you purely a one-person system, or have you started to spread out?
Oh boy, are we talking within the niche of Games Workshop or in general tabletop?
In general tabletop, if you...
I have the Song of Ice and Fire, the Game of Thrones game that was released by Cool Mini or Not. I also have the Chronicles of Hate, and I have the Unk Gods and Kings Kickstarter that I backed, which obviously won't arrive for probably 8 months or so, if not more. I also got in on the latest BattleTech game. And of course, Games Workshop products over the years. I've also played some Bolt Action. I have a fair bit of Flames of War Vietnam, which I'm actually not interested in because nobody just is interested in playing it here, so I'm thinking of getting rid of it all. But it's an Australian versus Viet Cong, the setup I've got. Yes, we're real, we have a military. And that's probably the majority of the tabletop I play these days, because too many systems is... Well, it's bad enough with what I've got, basically. The amount of space it takes up, and let's just say the wife is not pleased with the amount of space that my hobby takes up, and would very much prefer I downsized.
What was the thing that caught your eye when you first had those models? Was it just the model aesthetic itself, or as you looked further into it, was it the lore?
I would say that initially there was no one making products like Games Workshop made back in 1994. I would go past the store and remember where I could see the way they'd built the models and the tables, and cause this is all back before Realm of Battle tiles and pre-built terrain. They actually had to make the terrain like scale modelers did with locomotive sets. So you would go in there, they would have a table that they carved out of foam. They then applied textured paint or gravel to the surface of it. They would come along, they would flock the whole table. If they had, they'd mix wet effects and such, and that was wow, when they'd make a lake on the table or something. And that was what, I was always creative. I think most people have a creative bone, but those of us who choose to go into models have that extra little something that drives us. I think that we want to build something, we have a vision in our head that we want to get out there and share with people. And when I saw them doing that, I was like, that's what I want to do. And I never, there's two ways that people look at it. I think when they see someone do a really amazing job of painting or building or creating something, it either disheartens them because they don't think they can get that level, or in my case, I take it as a challenge, whether it's ego-driven or what, that I want to do that. I want to get to that level. I want to create something that's that amazing and hopefully inspire other people to do the same thing.
What advice would you give someone just starting out on the hobby, or maybe your younger self now you've been involved for a while?
I would say the people who are getting started in the hobby to, before they go and actually buy anything, to actually sit there and see some different factions get played, even if it's watching them online, watching other people play with them on, say, a YouTube battle report, or going down to a local gaming club, or even just in a Games Workshop store, anything like that. See what the different factions are like, so you can try and pick something that best suits your tastes. Because trying to chase a meta, or just going with something like, Space Marines because it's the thing in the starter box, it may not be what you like, and it may kill a burgeoning passion. If you, say, for instance, really like something like Tyranids, it's not really going to do you much good to buy a starter set which is full of Space Marines, because you might not want to paint them, you might feel you've wasted your money on the set, there's a whole other bunch of factors that come into play. So that would be my probably big point. And then I would back it up by, okay, if you like this faction, again, before you go out and buy a bunch of models for it, maybe treat yourself to a novel or read some lore about that faction. You can get plenty of lore for free by going online, something like a 40k wiki of some description perhaps. Read up on it, and if you still think you really like the idea of the faction, okay, go out and buy something, but don't fall straight into, say, a start collecting box. Try and figure out what the core essential of that army is. So if you're into, say, Age of Sigmar and you like Nighthaunt, or maybe go for some chain ghasts, or chain brass pords, the real minor guys. Or if it's 40k, yeah, a box of just regular Space Marines, maybe a start collecting box or an easy to build box would be even better. Get something basic, simple, actually paint it, see if you still feel enthusiastic, and then go out and start spending the money on it. It's good to test the waters, I guess is what I'm getting at here, rather than going all in on $500 worth of Plague Marines and then realising you don't like the colour green.
Oh, yes. Have you ever had an extended period out of the hobby?
Yeah, when I first joined the military, for probably the first 3 years there, I did next to no hobby. Obvious reason was you're moving around a lot for a start in those early years with all your different training that goes on, your recruit training, your specialist training for your specific job role. People kind of forget that that's one of the things that happens in the military. You don't just do boot camp and, okay, now, your Special Forces Delta Sniper 6, go out there and kill Osama. It doesn't work like that. So, yeah, probably the first 3 years until I really got settled down, established, I sat it out. It wasn't that I didn't do anything. If I had leave or I was on holidays back home, yeah, I would do stuff, but it was not a continuous period of, here's the army I'm going to work towards. It was just more working on what I already had. I still had the books, I'd still read the books, but it was not the same.
What's the best part about the hobby for you?
That's a really tough one. I'd say it's probably the community. I have made so many great friends. Some of these people I've been friends with for 10, 20 years. And it's all thanks to this hobby. They're people I never would have met otherwise, who have just been fantastic It's really that simple. People like to talk about, the nerds and the weird mouth breathers you get in this hobby, and I've really found it's the opposite. These people, sure, there are some weirdos that do exist out there, but the majority of my interactions has been so positive over the years. The community has never really been a letdown for me. So I think that's probably the best thing about it. It's one thing to build models to fill in your spare time. It's another to find something that is fulfilling on a social interaction level, as well as that gaming level.
On the flip side, what's the worst part about the hobby? What do you think could be improved?
I'd say probably the sort of stuff I talk about on my channel, which is more of the company's interaction with the player base, and how the player base is, I think, a bit overly optimistic at times. I will come across as very overly pessimistic, but that's not really my nature. I'm actually a very positive person. The problem is that because my channel is trying to focus on the things that are wrong, that's sort of the net perception of the channel, which hopefully the Start Collecting series videos I did on the Horus Heresy sort of should give people more of an inkling towards what I actually prefer to talk about with the hobby.
What keeps you in the hobby?
Well, a man once said to me that whenever you pick a hobby, you need to make sure it's nothing like your work, because then what you find entertaining in your spare time will become a chore. And I think that's probably the biggest thing. Plus, it's a good hobby when it's a rainy day or it's lockdown or something like that. There are other things I like to do in life that I'm passionate about, but this is probably the biggest passion I have.
How do you deal with a burnout or a lack of hobby mojo?
I don't really get them very often, funny enough. I'm a stubborn personality, so I tend to, if I want to do something, I focus on it and just get it done. Whether that's because of my trade, military, some sort of egocentric personality, I'm not quite sure, but I've always been that way. And I find that if I am going through some sort of minor slump where I'm just not getting the passion or drive, listening to a good audio book or a good reading a good book on the lore or the fluff can really help to rejuvenate you. Even listening to something that's not directly related to the hobby but could help inspire you is also something that works. Like, you could watch something like, there was this movie Pathfinder, I believe it was called, which is about Vikings fighting Native Americans in North America. And I instantly get Chaos Warrior vibes from that. So if I was painting maybe a Chaos Warrior army for fantasy, I could watch that movie and the brilliant Clancy Brown and go, oh, okay, this is kind of giving me the bit of a Chaos Warrior vibe. I want to go paint some now.
So what projects are you working on at the moment?
I am working on several projects. One is a Solar Auxiliary Army, which has actually been sitting in a box for about 5 years because I went out, I bought it, started to put it together, and then got caught up on the actual rules came out for my Thousand Suns for a start. So I sort of went all in on that, and I'm just sort of getting back to those Solar Auxilia. I'm also working on a Demons of the Ruinstorm / Dark Mechanicum allied army, which is a very slow grow type thing. I'm just doing it as the models sort of fall into my hands. And just for fun, completely unrelated to the hobby, I've been doing a series of British battleships. Big fan of the Royal Navy. And it's basically one of each class to represent the evolution of the Royal Navy from the 1850s through to the 1950s. Okay. Which is a fun little project because you realise just how great the pace of technological change was. Well, one of the vessels I've got is the first turreted warship in the British Navy. It was a test vessel made out of a 3-decker man of war that was cut down, or razade. And that 3-decker man of war, next to HMS Hood came out basically 50 years later. And that 3-decker man of war stretches from the tip of the bow to the B turret, and that's it. That's how big the pace of change was. You've gone from a 900-ton ship to a 36,000-ton ship in less than 50 years.
Do you plan out your projects, or do you get sucked in by the rule of cool?
Rule of cool is something... I paint a lot of models for fun that aren't anything to do with my armies. That's where the rule of cool resides, generally. When I create an army project, I'm going to be spending big money on building a big army. Therefore, I do sort of pre-plan what I want to put in it. I'm in the lucky position where I don't have to play test my armies too much. Back in my 40k more competitive days, I would. But now I think I've been doing the hobby for nearly 30 years, that I can build an army on paper and I'll know roughly how it's going to function on the tabletop. I can see the little synergies, and it's very rare that I'm wrong. It does happen, and I'll admit when it does, but yeah, I'm pretty confident in my decision-making process now. So I'll build an army list and then I'll try and buy the units specifically to suit that list.
If your budget was unlimited, if you could only buy one army, what would it be?
Unlimited, could only buy one army. Oh, that's a tough one. I think it would be an old school Bretonian army, because I would need an unlimited budget to afford it. You just can't get the models for it anymore, and I always wanted one, but yeah, never could afford it as a kid. And then when I started to earn adult money, I was too caught up in the I'm going to build this 40k army mentality. I never got around to it. Now I sort of kick myself, because there's a lot of great miniatures I always wanted to paint, do all that unique heraldry. And I mean, there are other brands I can go to, like Perry Miniatures and that, and get some of their lovely knights, but it's not quite the same.
What do you hope to improve about your hobbying in the future?
For me, most of it comes down to practice now. Practice and perfect. There are certain techniques that I can do okay, like non-metallics. I can do it. I don't choose to do it very often, though, because I find it a bit too gimmicky for my personal tastes. That's probably just sour grapes, because I've lost a lot of painting competitions to people using non-metallic painting. Yeah, just perfecting what I know. I think that's the biggest thing, is always challenging yourself to do better than your last project. And the worst thing about painting a big army is you get better as you paint it. And so over the course of the project, you find yourself getting locked in on techniques that you know you can improve on, or you're better than, but you have no choice but to continue with them, because you need to keep a unified look to the force. I think many people can recognize that one. They start painting an army, and then they'll go off and they'll do something like a painting course with some high-end painter who shows them a bunch of new techniques, and they go home and they airbrush up a beautiful rhino, and they go and they look at the rest of their army and they go, oh, crap.
That's brilliant, Macca. That's the end of part A. We'll have a quick cup of tea break and come back with part B. Welcome back to part 2. So, Macca, the Outer Circle, how did that start as a YouTube channel?
We get asked this quite a lot. It basically started as a source for me to vent. I had some severe misgivings about the then in production Chaos Space Marine 6th/7th edition Codex. And I thought, you know what, every time I try and talk with the community, as in the wider community using the internet, people don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear the gripes or complaints. As soon as you'd say, hey, is this a bit broken? There were a lot of people who would instantly jump in the comments and be like, yes, 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 yes. And the admins on the pages would always come and turn off the comments or delete the post or ban you outright from the Facebook page. I went, you know what? Clearly there's a lot of people who feel the same way I do. Maybe I'll just make a video, use YouTube, just to air my grievances and say, hey, this is a whole bunch of things I think they got wrong with the book. I think in my naivety at the time, a part of me hoped that maybe the staff would see it and the little light bulb would flick on. They go, oh, yes, these are things we need to change. That clearly has never happened. But it became cathartic. I could go out, I could say, you know, this is something that isn't working for these reasons, and I'd like to see it changed. And I got really annoyed after a while because I'd bring out these videos and these suggestions and nothing would happen, and I think I got progressively more salty until I became what I am now.
Do you feel a pressure to produce content now you've got a large following?
Not particularly. This is not my job. This is something I do for, again, I think a bit of a cathartic release. So my main job, I'm an engineer currently working in a plastics factory. So that's taking up the majority of my time. That's, you know, I spend 45 hours a week there doing that. And when I come home and I want to talk about hobby, I can just jump on, do a live stream or something, just chat with whoever's around, or I can chat with my friends, especially if the company releases something. The Fridays from Forge World are probably my bigger day. And I try and have another episode I do, usually 2 to 3 episodes in the week. So one to do with the Friday releases, and then the other 1 or 2 depends on if someone has done something particularly stupid within the community. And I'll just talk about that.
Okay, now the old phrase used to be, it's just Marines versus Marines, so it's boring. But now with the flavours changing, with Solar, Cults, Militia, now Demons in the Runestorm, has that phrase ever been valid at all, based on the rights of war and what you can do with each army?
Well, even going back to Book 1, we had Mechanicum. Mechanicum in Book 1 were a very bare bones force. I believe it was Thalax, a Magos, a single special character. I think that was really it. But come Book 2, you had Castellax. I believe Mechanicum got their first sort of, like, they could use Land Raiders, just little things like that. And when you got to Book 3, you had a full-on Mechanicum list that could actually rival the Legion list for the sheer amount of units and versatility it had. And not only that, you got this list, but it also was broken up into the Mechanicum's own sub-factions, like the Tagmata, Auto Reductor, the Cybernetica. And so it was, okay, it's not just Marines and these guys, but it's Marines and these guys, and the Marines are going to have at least 18 different flavors for every Legion. And they're also going to have these guys. And then Book 4 comes along, and it's like, okay, now here's the Solar, and here's the Knights. Oh, okay, now we're expanding some more. And then you get to Book 5, you're getting Imperial Militia, and Book 6, you're getting Black Shields, you're also getting the Knights Errant, you're getting the Shattered Legions, which exponentially changes up the amount of different factions that are available. Because people may say it's a Marine versus Marine game, but let's boil that down for a second. If it's Marine versus Marine, it's one thing to say that they're toughness 4 and have a 3+ armor save, because that's pretty universal in 30k, even outside of Marine factions. There's a lot of stuff that's toughness 4 or 5. Mechanicum List's a great example. Mechanicum List also has a lot of stuff that has 3+ saves. The Solar Auxilia have a lot of 4+ saves, usually re-rolling many of those. So it's like, okay, I think it's as a general rule, you can say that those sort of stats, moderate toughness, good armor save, is consistent across the board. So, okay, let's look at the next thing. What about the firepower? Well, the Marines probably have the worst firepower in 30k. When you look at what the Solar Auxilia or the Mechanicum can bring to a gunfight, even the Imperial Militia, they will all shoot a Marine army off the table if you're trying to have a 1v1 shooting match. The Marines have versatility, which is where a lot of those other factions fall down. The Marines have the ability to throw troops into close combat and break up those shooting matches that they would normally lose. Even a dedicated Iron Warriors player who's got 30 Iron Warrior Siege Tyrants in his force is going to have trouble if he goes up against the wrong guy. It takes something as simple as a Mechanic army with a couple of Krios Venators that are just pretty much functionally immune to those missile launches from the front. They're only going to be getting penned on, 5s and 6s, and they're going to be sitting behind cover, and they're going to be throwing out a lot of long-ranged plasma equivalent shots. They'll gun down that Iron Warriors army. So you then look at the Marines themselves and then go, okay, what about the Marines? Are they all the same? And you go, well, no one is going to play a World Eaters army the way that a person is going to play an Ultramarines army. It's just not viable, because one of these armies is clearly going to be better at certain things than the other. The Ultramarines are going to be a bit of a better all-rounder. They have a few more buffs to their shooting, for instance, whereas the World Eaters, they've, as a Legion, gone all in on those close combat buffs, and their Legion specialist units also follow that train of thought. So, yeah, okay, you could say that it's a Marine-only game because it's full of toughness 4 and 3+ saves, and it can then also refer people to 40k, where for the longest time the Craftworld Eldar was full of 4+ saves and toughness 3, like the Solar Auxilia, and the Necrons are an army of toughness 4, toughness 5 with 2+, 3+ saves. Not anymore in 8th and 9th edition, but in the past there's always been something that's equivalent to Marines. I think where people go wrong is they look at Marines as a homogenous whole that represents the game, as opposed to a roughly general stat line with similar vehicles that then diverges very rapidly. So I hope that wasn't too long-winded an answer for you.
No, it was good. So the wave of interest in 30k really started to ramp up massively once the starter box sets. Well, look, they weren't really starter box sets, as Games Workshop called them, but Betrayal of Calf and Burning of Prospero came out. If Games Workshop came to you and said, Macca, we're sorry for ignoring you, can you make us a 30k starter box? What would be in it?
It depends. We talking something that has to have the broadest sales appeal, or something that I think would just suit 30k in general?
Let's go suit 30k in general, because I've got another question after this.
Okay. If I was to try and make something for 30k, I would like to do something I've been trying to do for 40k for a while, which is create half a starter box. That would be points matched with another starter box for another race. So, for instance, a Space Marine start collecting box, a Mechanicum start collecting box, a Solar Auxilia start collecting box. You would buy this start collecting box, and it would come with your basic rules, with a tape measure, some dice, that kind of thing. And if you wanted to buy with a friend, well, they could buy either a matching copy of that, or they could buy a copy of a Mechanicum Force. But either way, you would end up with the faction you want in your starter box. And when it comes down to what I would make it up of, I think 2 tactical squads and a multiple build HQ. So there's an old Space Marine captain. I don't know if you've at Games Workshop, the plastic Space Marine captain, and you can assemble him with a variety of different war gear, such as plasma pistol, power fist, chainsaw, all that. I think that kind of character is important because 30k has so many different characters, and they're very Legion specific what you're going to gravitate towards. For example, a chaplain is going to go well with a lot of word bearers armies because they need to have one, whilst someone like the Alpha Legion might be better served by one of their saboteurs. So multi-pose character and 2 tactical squads for a Space Marine faction. Break it down to what they most simply need, and allow people to then build up their army from there.
So the next part of this question from myself is a bit cynical, really. The 30k starter box, I believe, will be more set for a wider appeal. It would have more 40k possible units in it. What do you think?
If I was doing that, I would make a re-release of Rogue Trader. I would offer a land speeder, 3 tactical squads worth of Beaky Marines, the Mark 6 Corvus armor, the one that everyone associates with the Raven Guard, because that is an armor type that works perfectly well for Heresy. It works perfectly well for 40k. So that way you could appeal to 2 different demographics at once, which means you will sell those boxes as a company. 30k players will want it, especially the Alpha Legion and the Raven Guard, but other legions are more than welcome to use the armor. It did get quite common, sort of mid to late Heresy. The vehicle in it, I think a land speeder, maybe a plastic Deredeo, but it would be pretty good to see a redo of the old Farabundus pattern dreadnoughts that came out in the original Rogue Trader game. For the land speeder, I think a scimitar land speeder would probably be the one I'd prefer to put in it, in plastic, because it's just a big hunk of resin. They're kind of a pain in the butt to put together. So that'd be great to see in it. And that way, yeah, people can either play it as Rogue Trader, or they can use those forces for 40k, or they can use those forces for 30k. And it sort of covers off on multiple areas. That's how I do it.
Have you got a top 3 resin kits which you would like to see in plastic?
I'd love to see a plastic Contemptor Dreadnought. I heard they made one for Betrayal at Kelth, but I don't remember a good-looking plastic Contemptor release with Betrayal at Kelth.
No, that is literally the worst model in 20 years, I think.
Yeah, I call it the Contemptor Rigor Mortis because it's stuck in that horrible upright pose, and when they built it, they made it so that the arms are completely different to all the arm options available from Forge World. So you actually have to cut and chop and change things before you can magnetize it. It's the worst of both worlds, if that's somehow possible. So that's definitely one, because I think every army should have that. I also think that the Dymos pattern Rhino chassis should probably be converted to fully plastic kit, because the resin kit tends to get a lot of warping for a start. But second, it's also a base model for a lot of 30k vehicles. And I would like to see more Rhino chassis and Rhino chassis variant vehicles released. Because it's so ubiquitous. I don't want to be seeing more vehicles like the Aquator Bombard or the Mastodon coming out, because frankly we've got enough stuff that fulfills those sort of really heavy vehicle roles, super heavy vehicles, that kind of thing. I want to see more of those Rhino chassis. What crazy stuff did they come up with in the Heresy? Like, okay, we got Whirlwinds, we got Predators, we got Vindicators. What else was there? Were there Proto Razorbacks? Were there different types of command vessels or vehicles? What about something that's sort of the equivalent of the Death Striker rocket from the Imperial Guard? Was there a Rhino chassis that had just one gigantic missile on it? What about a Rhino that's whole job is teleportation focused or bombardment focused, where it acts as a scouting vehicle? Maybe good in those armoured company lists. So there's a lot they could be doing with Rhinos, I think. Plus, they're a great painting opportunity. So that's definitely one. I'd say probably the last one out of 30k kits. If I had to stick with Marines, I'd say the Sicaran battle tank.
Yeah.
As much as I love the Land Raider, I think the Sicaran battle tank is probably the most popular vehicle in 30k. I know a lot of people will argue, oh, but Spartans, and yeah, not every army uses them, but everyone, I think every army I've ever seen has a Sicaran somewhere in it at some point. The Raven Guard armies full of Jump Marines somehow pack one in. Iron Warriors pack one in. It's just everywhere. So it'd be great to see that.
Have you got a favourite unit in 30k?
Oh, geez, that's a very tough, open-ended question. I think I'm a really big fan of... I like a lot of the Terminators for the different legions, but I'll go with something a bit selfish. I'll say the Castellax Achaea for the Thousand Suns, just because they're a bit out there. They're not Marine, they're not Mechanicum, and they've got that Egyptian look. They're a great little unit, I think.
You've mentioned a lot about the lore and reading the Horus Heresy books. Have you got a favourite unit which appears in the books but doesn't have models yet?
Well, that's another tough question. I'd say out of characters who haven't got their rules, but I absolutely loved, I'd probably say Yasuigai, the Stormseer of the White Scars. He's such a pivotal character in the stories. He's the Khan's most trusted advisor, and when people think of the White Scars, and they mostly think of him and the Khan, and then sort of Chinzar is sort of like second fiddle to those two. And for him to not get a model, and for Forge World to come out and make up their own guy, Solomon Khan, was just a real... wasted opportunity is the term I'll pick.
Where do you see 30k going once, spoilers, Horus dies, game-wise?
I think they'll go into the scouring. The question is if they stick with the 30k rule set, if they even still carry it to that point, or if they just straight up move to 9th edition and then just say it's a free-for-all, use what you want, do what you want.
The community of 30k is ever evolving based on the rule sets which they use. The Eye of Horus brought out the Centurion rules to now King Fluff his own Xenos rules. Are the community losing trust in the Forge World team to produce a rule set which is coherent?
I think I've lost a bit of that trust. I don't think the community has. I think a lot of the community reaction to the game is... It's being driven from two sources. The first is the fact that the community can produce content far faster and more efficiently than Forge World. So that's a definite major factor. It takes Forge World 1 to 2 years nowadays. It used to take 6 months, but it takes them about 2 years now to produce a book, and the books we're getting have been more and more subpar, in my opinion, with less artwork, less balance. You see things like the Angel's Tears in the most recent book, and you're like, what is going on here? And so that's a major factor, more so, I think, than just the sheer balance of the game, as it were. The community can go, hey, I've got an idea, let's do this at our local club, and they just do it. It's done. You got people like the Mournful who, in their spare time, working out of their home office or their garage, can come up with an entire red book for a Xenos faction, for instance. Go out, get it printed, delivered to people, just as a community event to inspire people, which they're just doing for themselves, for fun. They're not making a profit or anything off, and it's great. And then the same span of time, the actual professional company who has people employed full-time to do it as a job couldn't even produce that level of content. Is mind-boggling. And it goes hand in hand with the fact that these communities are making what they want. And what they want is very narrative-driven. So when you look at what's being done with Forge World, they're making a more or less linear storyline of we're going from the Betrayal of Isfahan through to the Siege of Terror over about 90 books spread out over from 2012 to 2154, the current release schedule. And so they're going that way, whereas the community's like, hey, we want to play some skirmish games or play some games that are more like 2nd edition 40k or Rogue Trader. So that's where you get systems like Centurion, where they're like, let's just have some Marines and some Dreadnoughts and stuff on the table. I don't want to play a game where I've got to go up against a Typhon siege tank and every turn I'm just going to have to remove 20 models from play that haven't done anything yet, and I spent hours and hours painting up, and people are painting all these cool infantry models. They want to use them, and these rule sets that people are coming up with enable that.
You produced a really good video recently, I'll post a link below, about your insight into plastic moulding and making. About how much it actually costs to make a mould and profit margins per box set that GW sells. Does this kill off the idea of them ever selling STL files for their models?
I think they'd be foolish not to. Frankly, because 3D printers are coming hard and fast. The quality that people are already getting out of the current generations at a civilian scale, let alone a commercial scale, is astonishing. Something like an Anycubic Photon is not super cheap, but it's pretty purchasable for most people who can afford Warhammer. They can afford one of those, or an Elegoo Mars, whatever floats their boat, and you'll get a model that's pretty much Games Workshop quality level out of it if you know what you're doing with that printer. As the technology becomes more and more user-friendly, people are going to naturally gravitate that way, and if there is more supply and more demand for that resin that's used in them, it will bring down the price of the resins dramatically as well, because it's going to be one of those things that the more popular it gets, the more of it the companies that make it are going to produce, because they're just going to go where the money goes. And when things like the Aquator Bombard, for instance, get previewed by the company, and it doesn't come out for a month or two after it's previewed, there's already STL files up within a week of it being previewed, and people are printing them at home. So Games Workshop's business model would be wise to sell STLs. Will it turn around overnight? No, they'll be able to continue their business well into the 2030s at this rate. Being more, I think, more the convenience factor. They're selling people, hey, look, you don't have to put this file into your 3D printer and print it and clean the sprue off it and use all this isopropyl alcohol and nasty resin. You can come into our store and buy this nice, convenient, easy to purchase box. And going hand in hand with that, the company has always said we are a model producing company, not a rules producing company, which again, I find I raise a bit of an eyebrow to, looking at how many books they release with rules. But that will definitely be a major avenue for them. Still will be selling hobbying supplies and rules to go with their models.
Where can people find you on the internet?
If they look for The Outer Circle, they will find us on YouTube. We also have The Outer Circle Instagram, and of course, we're on Facebook.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Macca. Thanks so much for joining me today. One last question, though. Does pineapple belong on pizza?
It does not. The people who do that are filthy barbarian deviants. It is a nice, sweet fruit. What is it doing on a savoury pizza? You disgust me, people.
But tomatoes are fruits, and they're on pizzas.
But I wouldn't call tomatoes sweet. At least not here in Australia. They're juicy, they're succulent, but they're not sweet.
Okay, Macca.
Yeah, tomato works. Thank you very much for having me, mate.
Thanks so much.